The rain didn't just fall. It slammed against the asphalt like a barrage of spent shell casings, cold and unrelenting. Key Vance shoulder-barged through the heavy service exit of the Swift Drop Central Hub, her high-vis vest already bleeding its neon yellow glow into the gray soup of the city. 14 hours. 14 hours of dodging gridlock on a fixed-gear bike, hauling high-priority legal documents that weighed more than her pride, and dealing with a dispatch system that glitched every time she dared to stop for water. Her calves throbbed with a rhythmic, stabbing ache, a cruel reminder of the track star she used to be, and her vision was beginning to fray at the edges, the city's neon signs vibrating in the haze of her fatigue. She fumbled with her water-slicked phone, the cracked screen nearly impossible to read under the torrent pouring off the hub's corrugated metal roof. The courier app was a blur of red notifications, but one stood out. Her rideshare, a black sedan, was idling just 40 feet away in the shadows of the loading zone. It was the only way out of this drowned hellscape. Clinging to her final delivery bag like a lifeline, Key ducked her head and sprinted toward the sleek, dark silhouette, unaware that the man waiting inside didn't work for an app. He owned the city. The silence inside the sedan was thick, heavy with the scent of expensive leather, ozone from the storm, and a hint of sandalwood cologne. Key's head lolled against the seat as the car hummed with a vibration that felt far too smooth for a standard rideshare. Her consciousness flickered back to life, pulled from the depths of a dreamless sleep by a sensation she couldn't quite name, a prickle of cold air on her skin that didn't belong to the rain. She blinked, her eyelashes heavy with dried salt and fatigue. The city lights outside were a smear of neon blue and gold, but inside the cabin, the darkness was absolute, save for the faint, rhythmic glow of a heavy silver ring tapping against a glass tumbler. The sleep of the innocent is a fascinating thing to witness. A voice drifted through the shadows. It was deep, cultured, and carried the sharp, unmistakable cadence of a London elite. Though, I suspect innocent isn't quite the word for someone who breaks into an armored vehicle in the middle of a territory dispute. Key's heart didn't just race, it slammed into her ribs like a trapped bird. She sat up abruptly, her hand instinctively clutching the straps of her Swift Drop bag. As her eyes adjusted, the silhouette in the opposite corner solidified. He sat with his legs crossed, a sharp-jawed man in a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the dark, creeping ink of a tattoo that climbed his throat like ivy. Before she could speak, a metallic click echoed from the front seat. She turned her head to see a wall of a man, Bane, pointing a sleek, black semi-automatic directly at her forehead over the headrest. His eyes were as cold as the rain outside. "Sela's," Bane growled, his voice a low vibration. "The doors are locked. I can handle this security breach now." Key looked from the barrel of the gun to the man with the silver rings. Most people would have screamed. Most would have begged. But Key was 14 hours into a double shift. Her brother's hospital bills were sitting on her nightstand like a death warrant, and she was simply too tired to be terrified. She let out a long, ragged sigh and slumped back against the leather, her eyes meeting Sela's. "Is the gun really necessary? I'm a delivery girl, not a ninja. I just wanted a ride home, and your car looked like the one on my app." Sela's Thorn tilted his head, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He signaled for Bane to lower the weapon. He had spent his life surrounded by people who trembled at his name, yet this girl, with her damp hair and exhausted eyes, was looking at him as if he were merely an inconvenience. "You're not afraid," Sela's observed, leaning into the light. The silver rings on his fingers glinted. "That is either very brave or very dangerous for you, Key Vance." "I'm just tired, Mr. Thorne," she muttered, closing her eyes again. "If you're going to kill me, just make sure my brother gets the insurance payout. If not, can we at least drive toward the East End?" Sela's chuckled, a dry, melodic sound. "Bane, put the safety on. I think I'd like to keep this one." The following 3 days were a blur of caffeine and missed calls. Key tried to convince herself the encounter in the rain had been a vivid hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation. But the weight of the silver ring Sela's had pressed into her palm before letting her go, a token for her time, told a different story. She kept it tucked deep in her pocket, a cold, heavy secret that seemed to pulse whenever she passed a black sedan. The Swift Drop Dispatch Center was a chaotic hive of flickering monitors and shouting couriers, smelling of stale coffee and wet rubber. Key was adjusting the straps of her thermal bag, preparing for a routine run to the financial district, when the room suddenly went dead quiet. It was the kind of silence that usually preceded a police raid or a building collapse. She looked up to see the heavy industrial doors swinging shut. Silas Thorne stood in the center of the grime-streaked floor, looking entirely out of place in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than the entire fleet of delivery bikes outside. Beside him, Bain loomed like a thundercloud, his presence enough to make the most hardened couriers take a step back. "Kiana Vance," Silas's voice carried easily through the warehouse, smooth and dangerously calm. Tasha, frozen at the dispatch desk, looked at Key with wide, terrified eyes. Key stepped forward, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I thought we were even, Mr. Thorne. I didn't steal anything." "On the contrary, Key, you showed me something quite valuable," Silas said, stepping closer until he was within her personal space. He ignored the grit and the grease of the hub, his focus entirely on her. "I have a package. It needs to cross the North Bridge by midnight. Normally, that wouldn't be an issue, but the police have set up a blockade, and my usual routes are being watched by people far less polite than the authorities." He leaned in, the scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco cutting through the warehouse's metallic tang. "The bridge is closed to vehicles, but the pedestrian footpaths are open. A courier on a bike, someone who knows the blind spots of the security cameras and the rhythm of the city's back lanes, could pass through unnoticed." "You want me to smuggle something," Key whispered, her grip tightening on her bag. "I want you to deliver something," Silas corrected, his silver rings catching the harsh overhead fluorescent light. "Consider it a high-priority Swift drop, $10,000 for 10 minutes of your time. Enough to clear a significant portion of those hospital bills you mentioned." Key looked at Tasha, then back at the man who represented everything she should be running away from. But she saw the desperation in her brother's medical statements, and she saw the strange, flickering respect in Silas's eyes. "One rule," Key said, her voice steadying. "I don't look in the bag." Silas's smile was sharp and satisfied. "Deal. Bain, give her the coordinates." The tires of her bicycle hissed against the oil-slicked pavement as Key wove through the narrow arteries of the old industrial district. In her ear, the comms unit Silas had provided crackled with static. Behind her, 3 blocks away, a convoy of black SUVs moved with a heavy, armored grace, but Key knew they were moving into a graveyard. "Silas, stop the car," she breathed into the mic, her lungs burning with the familiar, rhythmic fire of a sprint. "Bain, do not turn onto 4th. Dominic has the whole street mapped." "We have clear signals, Vance," Bain's gravelly voice snapped back. "Our tech says the route is open." "Your tech is being fed a loop," Key yelled, standing on her pedals to gain speed. She didn't need a monitor to see the trap. She saw the subtle signs of the city's unrest. A cluster of drones hovering too low near the power lines, the way the streetlights flickered in a sequence that wasn't random. Dominic Vane was a digital ghost, and he had turned the grid into a noose. She skidded around a corner, her bike sliding dangerously close to a stack of rusted crates. She knew an alleyway, a gap between 2 condemned textile mills so narrow that even a motorcycle would struggle to pass. It was a ghost path, a route lost to city maps decades ago. "Listen to me," she gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs. "There's a loading dock at the end of the 3rd Street cul-de-sac. It looks like a dead end, but the service ramp is still structural. If you take the SUVs up there, you can bypass the intersection where they're waiting to jam your electronics." "Key, if you're wrong, we're sitting ducks in a confined space," Silas's voice interrupted, calm despite the stakes. "I'm never wrong about these streets, Silas. Trust the girl who's been running them since she was 12. A long silence followed, punctuated only by the heavy thrum of her own breathing and the whir of her chain. Then, the screech of heavy tires echoed through the brick canyon behind her. The SUVs veered, following her lead. Key didn't wait to watch. She pedaled toward the upper catwalks, her eyes tracking the movement below. Just as the Thorn convoy cleared the ramp, the intersection they would have been in erupted, not with fire, but with a blinding pulse of blue light. A high-frequency EMP blast. Every streetlight on 4th went dark, and the digital billboard above it fried with a hiss of sparks. Dominic's trap had sprung on empty air. Key coasted to a halt on the elevated walkway, her chest heaving as she looked down at the SUVs safely idling in the shadows below. Silas stepped out of the lead vehicle, his silver rings catching the faint moonlight as he looked up. He didn't say a word, but the way he adjusted his cuff and nodded toward the darkness was enough. She had saved the lion, and for the first time, the predator looked at the delivery girl as an equal. The adrenaline from the chase had settled into a low, vibrating hum by the time Silas led Key into a private booth at a basement diner that smelled of toasted rye and ancient secrets. It was the kind of place that didn't exist on any digital map, a sanctuary where the city's noise couldn't reach. For the first time, the tension in Silas's shoulders seemed to unspool, replaced by a weariness that matched Key's own. Across the scarred wooden table, Silas watched her eat with a quiet intensity. He had shed his suit jacket, and the intricate tattoos on his forearms were fully visible, flowing like dark quivers under the warm amber light of the booth. "You have a talent for finding paths that aren't there, Kiana," Silas said softly, swirling a glass of dark amber liquid. Key looked up, her fingers still hovering over a piece of crust. "I just see the gaps. People focus on the walls, I focus on the spaces between them. It's how I survive." She gestured toward his hands, where the heavy silver rings glinted. "What about you? What do those represent? They don't look like jewelry." Silas looked down at his hands, his expression hardening. He touched the ring on his pinky, a thick band engraved with a crown of thorns. "Each one is a weight. This was my father's. It represents the docks in London, the blood spilled to keep them. This one," he pointed to a crest on his index finger, "is for the territory here. They are markers of duty, of a legacy I never asked for but was born to carry." He leaned back, the shadows of the booth playing across the tattoos on his neck. "People see the power, the cars, the silence that follows me into a room. They don't see the cage. I've spent my life maintaining a throne built on glass and old grudges." "Then why stay?" Key asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You could just walk away." Silas let out a short, dry laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "In my world, walking away is usually done in a pine box. But lately, seeing you run through those alleys, seeing the way you fight for something as simple as a hospital bill." He paused, his gaze locking onto hers with a sudden, raw vulnerability. "It makes me wonder if there's a gap in the wall for me, too. I want to leave the syndicate, Kiana. I want a life where I don't have to look at my hands and see the people I've had to break to keep these rings." Key felt a shift in the air, a dangerous intimacy that was more terrifying than Bane's gun. For a moment, he wasn't the British lion or the boss of a syndicate. He was just a man looking for an exit. "It won't be an easy delivery," Key said, echoing his own words from days before. "No," Silas agreed, reaching across the table to briefly touch the back of her hand with a ringed finger. "But I think I've finally found the right guide." The following morning, the sun attempted to pierce through the city's persistent haze, but for Key, the air felt heavier than the storm. She was back on her bike, the silver ring a secret weight against her thigh, while her courier headset hummed with Tasha's frantic updates. To the rest of the world, she was just another girl in a high-vis vest weaving through traffic, but in the digital slipstream, she had become a beacon. High above the city, in a loft filled with the low hum of cooling fans and the glow of a dozen monitors, Dominic Vane watched a pulsing red dot move across a map of the East End. He leaned back, a jagged, neon-lit grin spreading across his face as he tapped a rhythm on his keyboard. He didn't need to break into Silas Thorne's armored vaults to destroy him. He just needed to exploit the one unsecured link in the chain. "Found you, little bird," Dominic murmured, his fingers dancing over a secondary terminal. With a few keystrokes, he bypassed the encryption on the SwiftDrop server. He didn't just want Key's location, he wanted her history. He watched as her route data from the last 3 days unfolded, the long idle time near the hospital, the unscheduled stops at the Thorn loading docks, and the late-night ghosting of her GPS near a basement diner. The pattern was undeniable. Silas Thorn, the man who treated the city like a chess board, had finally placed a piece on the table that he actually cared about. On the street, Key felt a sudden, sharp vibration from the phone mounted to her handlebars. The Swift Drop app flickered, the screen turning a violent shade of crimson before resetting to its standard interface. She slowed her pace, frowning at the device. "Tasha, you seeing this?" Key asked, tapping her earpiece. "My app just glitched. It's showing my next pickup as The Void." "Key, get off the grid," Tasha's voice came through, uncharacteristically tight and stripped of its usual humor. "I'm looking at the backend logs. Someone didn't just hack your account, they've mirrored your entire phone. They're seeing everything I see. Every message, every photo of your brother's bills, every location ping." Key's blood ran cold. She looked up at the nearest traffic camera, its black lens feeling like a predatory eye. She wasn't just a delivery girl anymore. She was a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading straight to Silas's throat. "They're using me to find him, aren't they?" Key whispered, her knuckles white on the grips of her bike. "It's worse than that," Tasha replied, her voice trembling. "Dominic just sent a ping to your phone. It's a photo, Key. It's a shot of the back of Silas's head from inside that diner last night. He's not just tracking you, he's showing you that he's already there." The panic didn't come all at once. It arrived in the terrifying silence that followed Tasha's last word. Key skidded to a halt in the middle of a pedestrian plaza, the static in her earpiece sounding like a dying heartbeat. She tapped the unit frantically, her breath hitching in her throat. Tash, talk to me," she pleaded, her voice cracking. Instead of her friend's witty banter, a new sound bled through the line, the heavy, rhythmic thud of a door being kicked off its hinges, followed by a sharp, muffled cry that could only belong to Tasha. Then, a voice that sounded like broken glass filtered through the speaker. "Such a diligent little worker," Dominic Vane purred. "But your dispatcher is having some connectivity issues, Key. Why don't you come to the central hub and help us fix the signal?" The line went dead. Key felt the world tilt. The vibrant, neon-lit streets she had conquered suddenly felt like a labyrinth designed to swallow her whole. For months, she had treated her involvement with Silas Thorn like a high-stakes delivery, a job with a beginning, an end, and a paycheck. She had convinced herself that as long as she stayed on her bike and kept her head down, the violence of his world couldn't reach the people she loved. She was wrong. The shadows hadn't just touched her. They had reached out and snatched the only person who kept her grounded. She didn't call the police. She knew instinctively that Dominic's reach into the city's digital grid would see a patrol car coming from miles away. Instead, she dialed the one number she had memorized but vowed never to use. "Silas," she whispered when the call connected on the first ring. Her hand was shaking so violently she nearly dropped the phone. "He has Tasha. Dominic is at the hub." "I know," Silas's voice was a low, terrifying rumble of thunder. "Bane is already tracking the power surge Dominic used to override the hub's security. Kiana, listen to me. Do not go in there alone." "She's my best friend, Silas. She's in there because of me, because I got into your car." The guilt was a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. She looked at the silver ring still tucked in her pocket, the symbol of a world she thought she could navigate. "You are a courier, Key, not a soldier," Silas said, his tone softening with a grim urgency. "Stay exactly where you are. We are 3 minutes out." But Key was already mounting her bike, her jaw set in a hard, desperate line. She knew the ventilation shafts of the hub better than anyone. She knew the gaps in the walls Silas had admired. If Tasha was the package, Key was the only one fast enough to make the delivery before the clock ran out. She didn't wait for the Mafia boss. She dived into the traffic, a streak of neon yellow disappearing into the dark maw of the city. The tires of Key's bicycle shrieked as she banked into the final turn toward the Swift Drop hub. Her body was a map of exhaustion, every muscle fiber screaming in protest after what was now her 14th hour of constant motion. But the fatigue was a distant, dull roar, silenced by the sharp, electric surge of adrenaline. In her wake, The roar of Silas's high-performance engines tore through the night, a pair of black predators following a neon-yellow ghost. "Bane, the front gate is a kill zone," Key commanded into her headset, her voice surprisingly steady. "Dominic has the cameras looped and the security shutters rigged. If you ram it, you'll be trapped in the airlock." "Then where Vance?" Bane's voice crackled back, thick with the tension of a soldier entering a fray. "The loading dock roof. There's a seismic joint, a gap in the concrete, that leads to the old ventilation shafts. You can't get the cars in, but you can get the firepower in." Key didn't wait for an answer. She ditched her bike, the metal frame clattering against a dumpster, and began to climb. She moved with the fluid, explosive grace of the track star she used to be, finding handholds in the rusted corrugated metal that others would have missed. Above her, a drone swiveled its lens, but Key was faster, sliding into the shadow of a massive HVAC unit just as the red light swept her position. Below, Silas stepped out of the lead SUV, his white shirt a stark contrast to the grime of the industrial alley. He didn't look like a man about to enter a gunfight. He looked like a king coming to reclaim a stolen jewel. He looked up, his eyes locking onto Key's silhouette against the moon. "Follow her lead," Silas ordered. Key led them through the labyrinthine guts of the building. She moved through the darkness by touch and memory, navigating the narrow catwalks that hung precariously over the sorting floor. Below, she could see the glow of Dominic's tablets. Tasha was zip-tied to a chair in the center of the hub, surrounded by a dozen men in tactical gear. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and wet cardboard. Key looked back at Silas and Bane, who had followed her up into the rafters. Silas's hand was on the hilt of a concealed blade, his silver rings glinting with a cold, lethal promise. "On my signal," Key whispered, her hand hovering over the main breaker box she had reached. "I'm going to kill the lights and the auxiliary power. Dominic's tech will go blind for exactly 5 seconds. That's your window." In this 14th hour, Key Vance wasn't just a delivery girl. She was the architect of a rescue, the only one who could see the path through the dark. She took a breath, felt the pulse of the city beneath her feet, and pulled the lever. The darkness that followed the pull of the lever was absolute, a heavy, suffocating shroud that swallowed the swift-drop hub. For 5 seconds, the only sound was the frantic, metallic clicking of Dominic's useless tablets and the panicked shouts of his men. Then, the silence was shattered by the rhythmic, terrifyingly precise cracks of suppressed gunfire. Bane moved like a phantom through the shadows, but it was Silas who drew the eye. As the emergency red lights flickered to life, casting a bloody, rhythmic strobe over the sorting floor, Silas descended from the rafters not as a businessman, but as a butcher. He moved with a terrifying, predatory grace, his silver rings glinting like bared teeth in the crimson light. Key watched from the catwalk, her hands trembling as she gripped the railing. She had seen Silas as a sophisticated enigma, a man of silk and sandalwood, but the man below was a monster of the old world. He didn't just neutralize the threats, he dismantled them with a cold, surgical brutality that turned her stomach. When a mercenary lunged at Key's position with a combat knife, Silas was there in a heartbeat, his own blade flashing. The sound of the struggle was primal, the wet slide of steel and the ragged gasp of a dying man. "Key, get Tasha," Silas roared, his voice a raw, jagged edge she didn't recognize. He was covered in a spray of dark crimson that looked black under the red lights, his eyes wide and vacant, fixed on the next target with a terrifying hunger. He was slipping away, losing the man who wanted to leave the business and becoming the violence he was born to lead. Key scrambled down the service ladder, her feet hitting the floor as she sprinted toward the center of the hub. She fumbled with the zip ties on Tasha's wrists, her fingers slick with the mist of blood that hung in the air. "I've got you, Tash, I've got you," she sobbed, pulling her friend to her feet. Across the room, Silas had Dominic pinned against a heavy steel crate, his forearm pressed against the rival's throat. His face was a mask of cold fury, his hand raised for a final, lethal strike. He looked ready to burn the whole world down just to feel the heat. "Silas, stop." Key's voice pierced through the chaos, echoing off the high metal ceiling. He froze, his chest heaving, the silver rings on his knuckles stained red. He turned his head slowly, looking at Key and the terrified Tasha. The sight of Key, covered in grime, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and horror, seemed to pull him back from the precipice. The monstrous light in his eyes flickered and died, replaced by a devastating clarity. He let Dominic slump to the floor, unconscious but alive. Silas stood tall in the raining debris of the hub, his hands shaking as he looked at the blood on his white sleeves. He had protected her, but in doing so, he had shown her exactly why he needed to escape. The lion had saved the girl, but he had nearly lost his soul in the rain. Would you like me to finish the story with the final chapter, The New Path, where Silas makes his ultimate sacrifice for their future? The aftermath of the hub was not a celebration, but a reckoning. Silas sat in the back of the armored sedan, his hands finally clean of the physical blood, though the weight of his silver rings felt heavier than ever. Beside him, Key was silent, her hand locked firmly in Tasha's. The neon lights of the city blurred past them, no longer a playground of speed, but a landscape of ghosts. They met Dominic Vane at dawn on the neutral ground of the North Bridge, the very path Key had cleared nights before. The air was cold and tasted of salt. Dominic stood by his sleek, customized ride, a bandage across his throat, his eyes still burning with a hunger for the throne Silas had occupied for so long. Silas stepped forward alone. One by one, he pulled the silver rings from his fingers. Each clink of metal against the stone railing sounded like a closing door. These were the keys to the docks, the ledger of the East End, and the legacy of the Thorn name. He held them out in his open palm, the morning light catching the intricate crests for the last time. "You wanted the city, Dominic," Silas said, his voice carrying the calm of a man who had finally put down a crushing burden. "It's yours. Every port, every contract, every shadow. In exchange, the Vance name is erased from your grid. You do not see them. You do not speak of them. If a single digital ghost of mine or theirs flickers on your screens, I will come back. And I won't come as a businessman." Dominic reached out, his fingers trembling slightly as he took the rings. He had won the war, but looking at Silas's steady gaze, he seemed to realize he was merely inheriting a cage. Silas turned his back on the empire his father had died for. He walked toward the battered delivery bike leaning against the bridge railing. Key was waiting there, her high-vis vest discarded, wearing only a simple jacket. The exhaustion was still in her eyes, but the frantic, hunted look had vanished. "I made the delivery," Silas said softly, standing before her. "Everything?" Key asked, looking at his bare, scarred hands. "Everything that mattered," he replied. He didn't need a driver anymore. He didn't need Bane's gun or the protection of armored glass. Silas took the handlebars of the bike, and for the first time in his life, he let someone else lead the way. Key climbed onto the back, her arms wrapping around his waist, grounding him to a world of simple truths and honest work. As the sun finally broke through the clouds, they moved into the flow of morning traffic, just two more souls in the city, finally taking the right path home.